Welcome to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Kristen Haas. I'm a professor in the American Culture program here at the University of Michigan. And I have the great pleasure this semester of teaching a first-year seminar that is based on the work that you're going to hear about today. So the first order of business is a shout out to the American Culture 103 students in the room. Thank you. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce you to sculptor and monumental installation artist Cannupa Hanska Luger. As we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on Anishinaabe land. The Ann Arbor campus currently resides on land ceded through the Treaty of Detroit in 1806. Additionally, in 1817, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land transfer to the University of Michigan, ceded through the Treaty of Fort Meigs with the hope that their children could get educated. We acknowledge the sovereignty of tribal lands and the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and displacement of Native communities that facilitated the establishment of the university. We affirm contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabeg ties to this land, the profound contributions of Native Americans to this institution, and the university's commitment to educate the children of Native ancestors. That acknowledgement has become a part of the rhythm of life at the university and at places beyond universities. The work that you're going to hear about today is going to ask you to hear it in a different way, to feel it in a different way, and to think through that acknowledgement in a different way. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with the University of Michigan Museum of Art, our beloved UMMA, the Arts and Resistance Theme Semester, the U of M Arts Initiative, and series partners Detroit Public Television, PBS Books, and Michigan Radio. The event will begin with a video segment, then Cannupa Hanska Luger and Paul Farber, who is the director and co-founder of the Monument Lab, will take the stage for a conversation. And I should add, Paul Farber is not only a University of Michigan PhD, but a Department of American Culture PhD, and very proud to say, my former student. There will be a Q&A after the conversation, and you will find microphones here at the front. After their conversation, you can line up at those microphones to ask your questions. It's my pleasure to share a little background and to introduce our guests. As I said, Paul is the co-founder of Monument Lab and an AC PhD. Cannupa Hanska Luger is an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes of Fort Berthold, and he is also Lakota. He is a sculptor and a multidisciplinary artist. Through monumental installations and social collaborations that reflect a deep engagement and respect for materials, the environment, and community, Cannupa activates speculative fiction and communicates stories about 21st century indigeneity. He is the recipient of lots of awards. He is a 2022 Guggenheim Fellow, a recipient of the 2021 United States Artists Fellow Awards for Craft, and he was named a GRIST 50 Fixer for 2021, this list of fixers that includes emerging leaders in climate, sustainability, and equity from across the nation. For the past 2 years, the staff at UMMA and Paul Farber and the folks at Monument Lab have worked closely with Cannupa to realize the commissioned project now installed at UMMA, titled You're Welcome, and that's what they're going to talk about today. You're Welcome responds to the central question, how do we remember? You're Welcome examines the foundational narratives of the land occupied by the University of Michigan and both national and global discourse on nationalism, land sovereignty, militarism, colonialism, and sites of memory. The exhibit centers on Gift, an experimental time-based work that reimagines the facade of Alumni Memorial Hall, the UMMA building. Just last month, during the week of September 18th, Cannupa used a watery kaolin clay slip, normally used for joining, glazing, decorating pottery, to paint the word gift across the columns on the front of the building. Importantly, there was an ellipse both before and after the word, suggesting past, present, and future considerations of what the word might mean in that context. If you visited UMMA recently, you have seen that the neoclassical facade of Alumni Memorial Hall, and the UMMA building was built as a memorial to U of M students who died fighting in the Civil War and the Spanish-American War. That structure is now covered in white as a result of the work of the team who extended Cannupa's word gift to whitewash the whole building. You may have thought it was always white, and of course, metaphorically, it always has been. Through this intervention, Cannupa is challenging institutional memory and asking us to think about the whitewashing of history. Gift is accompanied by two gallery installations. The first is Meat for the Beast, which includes two pieces. This is not a snake, and the one who checks and the one who balances. These are integrated with the selection of objects from UMMA's collection. Cannupa's artistic practice and the relationship expresses the relationship between the museum's collections and resource extraction. The second piece, gallery installation, is the Monument Lab public classroom, where I am having the great pleasure of teaching my class this semester. It's fun to be in the museum and teaching. This work examines formal and informal modes of memory and memorial making on the campus and beyond. The entire commission was prompted by larger questions about what is a monument, who is it for? U of M has partnered with the Arts Initiative and Monuments Lab to engage the campus with these questions in a moment when monuments are coming down and monuments are going up. This talk tonight kicks off a weekend of memory and monuments programming, including a big open house on Saturday at UMMA, this Saturday from 12 to 4. There will be an open house celebrating this work. And across the weekend, there are going to be a lot of events. And if you go to the UMMA website, you will find all the information you need about those. So please join me. First, we're going to see a little video. And then Paul and Cannupa are coming up here. So let's give them a round of applause as a welcome as the video starts. Thank you.
Cannupa Hanska Luger, thank you so much for talking to us today. Cannupa Hanska Luger, thank you so much for talking to us today. The show, you're welcome, is going to be up at UMMA through February of next year. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
I should include the laugh, I guess.
All of the unseen efforts to write 4 letters on this building, the letters G-I-F-T, gift being a highlighted word in the Treaty of Fort Meigs, gift, a word that put in motion the land that the school was originally built on, gift, something that you can be grateful for and appreciate, gift, something that can be overlooked because you didn't have to pay for it. There are so many implications of this word. A gallery space over there was a distraction, something that we could promote up until this moment of me coming here and receiving the opportunity to work with UMMA and Monument Lab. And so that exhibition was really kind of like the magician's kind of like wavering hand as they're like, oh, you know, so this is the turn. It is a provocation. It's a provocation into a story that we're all so familiar with, a story of whitewashing and redaction, a story of invisibility, a story of extraction and celebration.
Hello. Docha Maragua. Good evening, everybody. Hi. Thank you all for coming. We get this rare opportunity to converse with one another. I truly enjoy talking with people rather than at people, but I do talk quite a bit. So we decided the best way to do this is to change the format a little bit. My dear friend here, he would maybe perhaps like to introduce himself after me, but I am Cannupa Hanska Luger. I'm Awache, Dripping Earth clan from the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes. I was born in Standing Rock, North Dakota. My father is Lakota, among many other things. And I'm a visual artist. I have a background in ceramics, but I'm comfortable and happy to work with whatever material is necessary to convey ideas. And working here at the University of Michigan on this project gave me a whole new medium to work with. And I think I could thank you for that. I could thank my ancestors for that. I can thank the original inhabitants of the land here, and the wind, and the water, and the earth. I think the depth and the scale of our gratitude should expand beyond this moment. And so with that being said, I would just like to say, Madzagirats, Getiwa Madzagirats, Migirit Pago.
Thank you, Cannupa. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I'm Paul Farber. I'm director and co-founder of Monument Lab, and I'm also curator in residence here at the university. And it's really a treat and honor to be up here with my dear friend and collaborator, Cannupa Hanska Luger, and also to give a shout out to the co-curator on the project, Ozzy Udama, who is not here with us tonight, who is at graduate school right now, but whose presence is felt. And of course, all of the teams and all of the people who made this project possible. So we have seen a brief video about this project, and I wanted to start with you kind of taking us back. You know, you got an invitation from us that had a question: how do we remember on this campus? And your response was, in part, to paint the word gift on the front of Alumni Memorial Hall. Can you take us back to kind of your initial thoughts when you received the invitation?
Yeah, initially, I suppose, where I came to, like, there was the moment of the invitation, you know, and there was a photograph of the museum. There was context kind of embedded in how we control and take images and what's presented forward. Seeing the building and the question, how do we remember? For me, like growing up, and perhaps any other Indigenous members in the audience here can confirm this for me at some point, but growing up as a Native person in the United States, there's a strange dissonance around history and like your social studies classes from this moment of going through an education system that reinforces a very specific narrative. And that question, how do we remember? The first thing that sparked in my head was like, who's we? Like, I'm pretty sure I memorized a lot of stuff. I don't know if I recollect or remember it, you know? And everything that I was kind of encouraged to learn about had an angle. And that angle was only a portion of the conversation and a portion of the story. And that doesn't feel like memory, you know, that's feels like something else. So the first question I had was, who is we in how do we remember? And then that was multiplied by the architecture of the museum, the Alumni Memorial Hall. And I was like, this is a perfect example of how we remember, because I don't remember Greece being here. You know, it's like there's a strange subconscious thing that, you know, growing up, I don't think most of us really comprehend the depth and the nefariousness of embedding this sort of architecture on our psychology. And as we move through the world, the built world presently, this is a forced recollection of a deep time relationship to place. The column becomes, you know, and this kind of Greco-Roman architecture is all over America, like everywhere. And it takes up a lot of space in the realms of education. And I'm like, that's not coincidental. The kind of subconscious thing that is received by seeing this, because it's been a few generations that we've seen this architectural form, and we just accept it for what it is. You know, this is, it's a building, whatever. But it's also modeled after a temple. Like, it's modeled after a space in which you humble yourself in order to enter, and in there is an access point to God's creation itself. You have to come here in order to speak. That's so contrary to what this land's original inhabitants have in their relationship to the capacity to speak to creation itself. The most profound structure you can enter is a cave in a mountain, you know, is the hollow of a tree. You know, these are places that are actually an anchor point for a deep time relationship to place. And seeing architecture like this reinforces a false narrative. And that false narrative is that America is old. And it has been here all the way back to the beginning of the Western imagination of written ideas. And to prove that, come to our temple, you know, come to the still preserved. That's the thing that's fascinating to me too. I'm like going sideways on it, but like these in Greece are falling apart. Like they're in ruin, you know? And so for me as a Native person, I'm like, I kind of like them like that, you know? And that is the inevitable trajectory of the empire, you know, is its dilapidation. We forget the level of maintenance it takes to preserve this structure in our place. And we reinforce it every day. And our lack of a conscious awareness of it allows it. It allows that space in our heads.
I want to, of course, ask you about the, why write gift, but I actually want to first talk about the act of writing. I think we've said that it took 2 years to write 4 letters on one building.
Yeah.
And just like in your experience, what was it like for you in your body to write on this, on these pillars, on this neoclassical facade, the word gift?
It was, it's like the simplest thing there is. Like I used to get in trouble for doing things like this,
And now you're honored here at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, a sanctioned wall to make some sort of thing. There was a lot of effort to even keep it quiet so that it felt a little bit more dangerous than it actually was, and actually play with the perspective of the audience, because I'm a sculptor. I make objects that exist in space. They tell a story, but on a kind of more interior level, from my perspective, I like the idea of a sculpture in space. Like a sculpture in space, it's complicated. It's a place that you can't go. Like once this thing is in, and putting it in museums and moreover, like wealthy homes, like that is the most expensive real estate there is on the planet presently, is like in somebody's home, in a museum. These are the spaces that the value of space is, down to the millimeter, I tend to do things like that. I like to work with the material of clay. I actually, all materials I really enjoy, and the materials that I choose have to make sense to me. Writing on the building, it seemed so simple. It seemed like the easiest thing. I wanted to use clay. I thought, this is great. Let's use slip from here, from the United States. Let's put earth back on this earth to expose an idea or a question, or really even highlight architecture in the world that we just kind of move through generally. The piece was actually, it means less to me than what I think it means to you. But what I think it means to you is insignificant, because what you think it means is probably the most important part of this exchange. But for me, I was like, this museum is a white space. All museums are white spaces. I don't feel comfortable entering museums. Museums house and hoard the world's cultures. And when the culture is not a thing, but a relative, a relation, then what's in there? It becomes a tomb. It becomes a scary place to kind of enter into. And I think about that psychologically entering into any museum ever. And I'm looking at the facade of the building and I'm like, well, technically it's not white. And I'm like, I actually don't know what white means. Like, what is white? And I think about that a lot, because I think the inception of white as a race was developed here in the US. And the sad part of it, or the point at which I can sympathize, is you didn't get to be white in America until you severed your relationship to the place that you're from. Once you are no longer belonging to a country, a people, or a culture, only at that point do you get to be white in America. And it felt empty, and it felt sad, and it felt as though we had to reinforce this notion in order to justify the trauma that is experienced through that severing. And this relationship and this reinforcement of a deep time to architecture is to soften the burden of displacement and absence. And I think everybody in this room has felt displacement. I feel like that is one of the driving forces of the American myth, is displacement. And I don't think we're addressing it directly. I think we are addressing the byproduct of displacement and separating in all these different ways. And for me, I was like, I want to make this building white by a definition I can truly understand, and that is through the color, you know? And the color I knew could be found in clay. And I knew that that clay could be found on this land, and that it could cover the surface of the building. And I knew that slip will wash away in the weather, in the rain, in the environment. So I thought I was doing the building a favor of being like, we'll use slip. Like, I'm not going to use paint, you know, it'll come off. Like, do nothing and it'll come off, you know. I was wrong.
I mean, I think about this process, and there's always, when you do public art and work in monuments, there's stakeholders. And you're thinking about, you know, in this project, there's the university, there's the museum, there are, you know, the Native American Students Association. I think of Ethram and Andrea and other Indigenous staff members. There's the permissions people, I'll say.
Yeah.
But you also insisted that the weather, the environment was not separate from this project or backdrop. You said this is an active participant. The weather should determine the way the artwork will manifest, which is like cuts against the idea, for those who understand galleries or museums, of climate control. Mm-hmm. It's ultimately to keep nature out. And it seems like for you, that was an important part. I want to ask you kind of a two-part question,
okay,
which is, you know, why the word gift? Why did you paint it? But I want to also ask, why did you cover it up?
Yeah. Gift was a word in, as an extension of this like ask on how do we remember. I was also informed about the Treaty of Fort Meigs and the word gift. And the word gift was capitalized with like quotations in this iteration. And I'm sure it wasn't in the original, you know? I'm sure it you know, fell into place just right and made sense. But I think with as we're being kind of engaging with one another and asking deeper who each one of us are, there's more information, there's new information, and that new information makes our existing information sometimes obsolete. And the word gift clearly popped out as a problem. You know, this is something we need to address. This word gift, in the context of a legal bonding term, has different context for the people writing it and the people agreeing to it and the people signing to it, and then the cultures in which they come from that define it, the language it's spoken in. These all matter. And when I saw gift capitalized and in quotes, I could see its potential omission from future discussions around the state's relationship to its Indigenous population and the university's relationship to the Indigenous population. And I know that when you teach one perspective as history and encourage us to remember that, I know how America is like an amnesiac. It's so quick to forget everything. And it's not even the fault of the present for that forgetting, because it was our ancestors that put in motion the omission of certain aspects. So it's not even forgetting, it's misremembering, you know? And I wanted to make sure that this word gift was large and prominent on a building that was designed for the memory of lives lost at this school. Because we know the value of things, but we can't comprehend the cost. And the word gift is there's a high cost on that word. And the value of it was the original gifted land. They understood the value. Like the original folks were like, all right, let's sell it. Now that it's been gifted to us, let's sell it and then build the school where it is presently using the funds from this exchange. Like, when did we talk about that? When did we agree to do that? How is that in the contract? Why is it still represented? And so I thought this word gift was really strong. There's also, from an Indigenous perspective, we talk about value and wealth, not in the sense of how much you have, but how much you can give. And this, like, hardwired generosity, you weren't considered wealthy if you kept everything. If that was your mode, the mode that we celebrate presently, the celebrity and of wealth, this is a model that's around possessions, what I have. But what you could give was actually the source of your generosity was proof of your wealth. Like, you could have all of this stuff, and if you didn't give it away, you were not wealthy. You were something else. And we know what that is. We've built an entire society around what that is. And it's killing us for what that is. So when you shift that perspective around the word gift, and this is the ellipses, right? When you shift that perspective around the word, like, I would love to live in a world where wealth is based on generosity. If we could celebrate those people because of what they have given rather than what they have, it changes the entire system completely. And so gift being exhibited in English, written on these pillars, is a provocation to consider what that means and what does gift mean to every person who could read it, you know? What's their experience? How are they reinterpreting all of this? So it was important to me to kind of like use that word as an anchor point. And then the obscuring, I was like, we could pressure wash the word off and then the building is just the building. Or we can do what I learned through assimilation, which is whitewash it. Whitewash the whole thing. Cover it with the very material that it is and obscure this actual word and language, not by its removal, but by its covering up. And in doing so, the entire facade becomes a white building. And then that highlights it on the landscape. Does that suddenly, does it catch the eye of the audience that's walking by it every single day, over and over and over? Does it change the way you see the building? And then moreover, back to the weather, when it washes it all away, is it a white building still? Like, is this building white? Is this an opportunity to actually pay closer attention to what the material is made of, which has been here for time immemorial. It actually has a deep time relationship to this place. It is sandstone, you know, and sandstone is a really interesting material because it's not the original stone that the material was made from. It was something else before, and it changed, and then it, through processes of erosion, through a deep time story, sat long enough to become something else, and that something else sat long enough to be quarried, and that thing sat long enough to be turned into a building. And simultaneously, like, I'm interested in the weather washing the white slip off the surface of the building and finding its way back into the river, back into the earth, back into the land. But I'm interested in the entire building doing that. Like, I'm interested in the inevitable and slow process of erosion that has been taking place since the building was built and since, you know, before the sandstone was sandstone. It's inevitable. And I think seeing those processes by watching the white erode away from it, you'll suddenly begin to see that the building itself is also falling apart.
You're saying the building's not supposed to be there forever? It hasn't always been there?
Nothing forever, ever. But it's hard to understand that, right? Like,
it hits you deep. It's, even if you don't put the words like between us or in your own mind, it's communicating a symbol, an aura of permanence. Even if when you walk up to the building, you can touch it and pieces of the sandstone come off in your hand.
oh yeah, don't touch it. Don't touch the building. Yeah, yeah. No, but this also brings into, into play some of the other things that were interesting through doing this process. Like, this was the strain, for me as an artist, this was a weird extension into something that I'm not comfortable with or didn't fully comprehend, which is like highly conceptual work. I had to provide drawings of what it was going to look like. There was like a little animation of how it was all going to come together. And I barely touched it. Like, all I got to do was write the word gift. So it felt really personal for me because I was like, now I'm participating in it. It's gone from theory and now it's become practice. And I like practice. I like touching things. I like getting my hands and working, because when I'm working with material, as much as I move and shape the material, it also moves and shapes me. Like, this is the actual exchange that is the highest value to me as an artist, is becoming better. Like, it's so simple, but it's true, and that interaction is what does that. Now, to do a project like this, I'm like, I work with clay. I make clay sculptures. I'm a ceramicist. And I'm still doing that. The sculpture is a thin layer of clay on the surface of this building, and I'm not going to fire it. I'm going to allow it to remain clay, allow it to remain itself. And so there was a lot of build and a lot of effort to get to the point to write the 4 letters, but that doesn't feel like it was like the least climactic art piece I've ever done, where it doesn't feel complete yet. And I can't complete it. This is something I really like. I don't get to finish this work. Like, the weather finishes this work. Your perspective finishes this work. Like, so it's strange for me to be sitting in a position on a stage in front of everybody talking about what I have done, and I'm like, I'm not done yet, and I'm not doing it. Like, there are other components that are doing the vast majority of what that looks like, and it's on architecture, and architecture that's 100 years old and has a whole steeped history and everything embedded in it here. And for me, I'm like, I think truly the art actually happened in the 2 years leading up to the moment to present this. Like, the art took place and you all didn't get to see it. Hopefully you benefit from it, but it took place in the silos of power that sit at universities. This piece is not in the museum. And I was like, where is in the museum? Like, where does the museum end and the campus begins? And it's at the surface of the building, but not anything on it. Like, it's outside of the museum. And so that means we had to get a whole variety of teams to agree to work on this project. And one thing that I had seen, engaging with the university, is that these silos of power do not communicate well with one another. Yeah, I know. I didn't go to, somebody said you don't say. I'm like, you all know better than me. I didn't go to a graduate program. I went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and it was a great school. It's small, and you can kind of affect change in those places, and you eventually know everybody. The scale of this place is so profound that you can move through it for years and never even get close to understanding it in its totality. But I feel as though if we are going to be engaging, and especially at the museum level, and I think this is the privilege that a museum has, is that it is very dependent on its public, and you're its public. And it's very dependent on its community, and it recognizes that it's not reaching it, and that community is oftentimes held in quotation marks, And I'm like, well, don't make it a weird Greek temple and see what happens,
Yeah.
And then they're like, yes, we've addressed that. So we built a steel and glass building. Like, crawling off the side of it. And that is not also a unique thing to this place. Like, this is something you see all over the country, like a weird modern building straddling an ancient building. And I'm like, what is the psychological narrative that that's telling me, that progress and industry is greater than where we come from? Like, what are these cues that architecture is subconsciously, informing us? But it's also a reinforcement of like, okay, you had one architect and then you had another. You have silos of power, and they're trying to be in communication with one another, but we don't communicate well, And so for me, the art was really about finding those paths and routes of communication and reinforcing them and encouraging them to communicate across these strange silos and engage with things that we didn't. I mean, the grounds, the facilities. There are so many different components that came into play that that was the real manipulation of material. It happened.
Institutional time.
Yeah. And institutional structure.
Yeah.
And system. The system of it. Because we don't see it all the time, we accept it for what it is. Like, we accept this building for what it is, and we don't question its structure. We just allow it to subconsciously affect us, And those silos of power don't end in the institution. You will see them when you leave here and you enter into the world and you're trying to engage with all of these different things. And I'm like, surprise, surprise. It's been there the whole time as a secret informer, subconsciously affecting what we will tolerate and what we'll accept.
And what we think is possible.
And what we think is possible, for sure.
You're talking about architecture, and I think one of the most powerful parts of the project, but also your influence on me and the work of Monument Lab, is about deep time and rethinking origins. And this was an image that came to our research, was the cornerstone laying, which is often thought of in very traditional Western terms as a beginning step. And I think one of the powerful prompts that you gave us back as a part of the breaking down those silos and working across them was, where does the rock and the stone that's being laid come from? Mm-hmm. And just getting a hint here, we look at this cornerstone being laid at a space that would become Alumni Memorial Hall and UMMA. And we see the sign that says, the quarry where this rock was coming from is in Ohio. And so myself and Aubrey Penny from Monument Lab drove down and followed your cue. And I would say, we saw visions of, it wasn't a jigsaw puzzle with the piece missing. It was different. It was a different relationship to the landscape. There were places where there were celebrations of the quarrying, but there was also this places of ghostly absence where you just see clearly stone that has been removed in industrial mechanical ways. I want to ask you about this. You've been talking a little bit about the sandstone, but thinking of stone as kin, thinking stone as not separable from the context. What's your relationship with that stone? What have you been able to think about and rethink about when it comes to stone in these monumental architectural spaces?
Yeah, I think about, there's one part of me that, has been, I was born in 1979, so I'm like an 80s kid, right? And so I was inspired and bombarded with so much information, and a lot of it fell into the realm of science fiction because of my tastes, And I'm like, I like some sci-fi stuff. And it was always this post-apocalyptic narrative, right? Over and over and over. It was we're barely gonna make it, we're reduced to this. And there were these images of a once, great metropolis reduced to rubble or something along those lines. But once again, it just goes back to the materiality. That sandstone was a mountain somewhere else, and that geological shifting of time moved all of that material into the location that it was eventually solidified and quarried from. So the inevitability of anything that we've built going back into those places and beginning to become stone once again, or being the earth once again, I always kept in mind. But there's also, you know, when we talk about kin and our relationship to more than human species, something that I think is an important technology that we really allow to move through the material sciences that we're working with. It's like, how do you relate to place beyond the Anthropocene, beyond the human scope? How do you relate to place as relative? You suddenly begin to see how, you know, we're grateful for these land acknowledgements, but rarely do they acknowledge the land, you know, the anchor point from which all is possible, like where you belong, not what belongs to you, but from the relationships that actually developed and shaped the vast and complex cultures that exist in the world presently. They all come from the earth, you know? At some point in all of our histories, collectively, we worshiped the earth. We worshiped the place, the land. I'm like, let's allow that to come back. Let's use the material sciences we've developed to reinforce that, and allow our technologies to reinforce that. And thinking about the earth itself and rock, we have stories with rock where stone is gendered. And when stone is in the earth, it is a grandmother. And when stone is removed from the earth or on the surface of the earth, it is a grandfather. And that there are all of these conversations around fluidity, you know, and transition being an important part of the narratives that exist, and that those narratives that exist are what actually help us empathize with land and environment. We recognize it not as an object, as a thing, as a stone, but that it has agency, and how the world affects it changes its being. So what is the gender of a stone removed from the earth, planted back into the earth, and then built upon? You know, I don't know. We haven't allowed ourselves to really consider what our relative of stone is in relationship to that, and we haven't allotted it the complexity. And without that complexity, it becomes very hard for us collectively to understand it as something other than a thing, you know? And so that quarry, all of this stuff, it makes me excited because I don't want to actively demolish the world we have presently. I don't want to demolish it. I don't want to waste my time repairing damage that I'm lived through. I want to imagine something that makes all of this obsolete and we don't talk about it anymore. You know, that we don't even bring it up because it was a ridiculous pivot in the human experience that gave us notions of grandeur, you know? I want to imagine how we adapt to the world we have presently radically changed, because we have sacrificed our fangs and our claws to be incredibly adaptable creatures. And yet, as we move through the earth within the last couple hundred years, like deep time, really, like it's an experiment. I know we've lived in it our entire lives and we see the shortfalls of it presently, but it is an experiment in the trajectory of life that is like falling apart. So the inevitability of adapting to new radical change, it's on the horizon. You know, we will see that. I don't want to waste my time demolishing it. I'm interested in how we reestablish our kinships and our bonds with place, and actually, rather than forcing an environment to adapt to us, which we have been doing in our experiment, what happens when we adapt to an environment again? What happens when we take the slow way of understanding what it means to belong to place? and pay attention to the protocols, pay attention to the systems that are navigating around us, rather than trying to develop a whole, industrialization of new systems and new complex problems that don't actually solve the core issue that we're facing presently. And I think that core issue, if we reduce it all down, comes all the way back to, something I brought up earlier, which is displacement, dislocation. Like, at what point in our experience collectively did we separate ourselves from the earth? It was taught to me. It was taught to like 2 generations ago of me that we were separate from the earth. That's not very long, and it didn't really stick. How long ago was it for everybody else? Like, at what point did you recognize or accept the bold lie that you are separate from nature? You are separate from the land. And as long as we keep trying to find our way back to that belonging, we are going to, rather than belong, fill that hole with belongings, with things. If I can own it or control it, maybe that's the closest sense I have to me not belonging to it, but it belongs to me. Like, let's do that.
Yeah, what you said to all of that, profoundly. And, speaking of that distinction, which you brought up in the project and really, brought us to a different level of understanding, was the difference between belonging and belongings, and how much of a profound shift that marks. And so just in that connection to Earth, I'm thinking about, like, this is not the first time that you have covered something in clay. You've made things in clay, and you've been doing it as an artist and who's experimented. I'm thinking about your Stereotypes project, where you made clay objects to break them.
Yeah.
How has your relationship to clay changed over time?
Yeah, that's a good question, because clay and ceramic, and any of my ceramicists or chemists in here understand, are 2 different things. Clay is potential, and ceramic is subject to entropy. Anything that you see built in any ceramic object, it's only that and broken versions of that far into the future. Clay can be reconstituted. It can find its place back into the earth. It's a question that keeps coming up, and it didn't sit in my head when I did this stereotype exhibition, but I started to realize that clay has infinite potential, and if I fire it, it goes through quartz inversion and it becomes ceramic, and that's a big responsibility, it felt like. It makes me question every time I load a kiln, like, is this worth it? Is it worth this infinite potential to become this thing? And in the instance for the stereotype exhibition, I was thinking about entropy. I was thinking about how a stereotype is a cognitive thing. It's a mental anchor. And at its core, a stereotype is an introduction, an opportunity to at a quick glance, try to get to know somebody else. Where the stereotype gets perverted is when you do not go any deeper. When you can stop at that first gaze and be like, now I know everything about everything, that's what you are. Stereotypes are not subject to entropy the same way ceramic is. And so my thought was, let me anchor an idea onto something physical, and then it can be subject to entropy on a level that's different than ideas. And then I got scared. I did not intend on breaking them. It was actually the market of art that scared me. At the time, I'm living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I still live outside of there. I just graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts. This was my first kind of solo exhibition of work. And the gallery that was representing me at the time, I had built all of this stuff and I put it into this exhibition. And they came up and they were like, oh, we are so excited. We have so many collectors who are ready to get this work, you know, and they're like, we're gonna make a fortune, you know, it's awesome. And there was no fortune to be made, really, but they were really excited about what they were seeing and the interest from the market to collect it. And I got cold feet. I was like, if this stereotype sits on the coffee table of the wealthy Texan, this is in New Mexico, so it's usually a wealthy Texan, collecting this work and sitting in their home, removed from the context of the exhibition, does it reinforce the stereotype? Like forever, you know? Because once an object like this becomes a part of a collection, then the models of preservation are put into it, you know? And the Western world can preserve the hell out of a thing for a very long time, you know? Sequester it in glass. What was it? The environmental control, what is
Climate control.
Climate control, yeah, exactly. And so it scared me, and I was like, I don't think that these should exist as objects because they're just gonna reinforce the various stereotypes that I'm hoping to like dismantle. So I put together quickly an extension of this work where I was like, I'm gonna come in and I am going to break all of these pieces. And I'm going to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts. There's a lot of other Native students and artists, and several of my peers were like, "Oh, let me come. Like, I want to bring an axe and I want to hit it." You know, another one's like, "Let's take it out to a range and let's shoot it and destroy this stereotype with like fervor." And I was like, you know what I actually really like about this? All I got to do is let it go. All I got to do is let go of the stereotype, and it's falling, shatters. And I was worried about the museum. No, the museum was worried about the museum, and they were like, will that damage the floor? And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, shoes damage the floor. Like, I'm gonna drop a big old piece of clay, of course. And they're like, okay, do we have any other options? And so I grabbed a stone from the courtyard and used that as the anvil of the dropping. And I was like, I would drop it right onto this stone. And the profound thing that happened to me, once again, going back to rocks and that sort of kinship, this was a profound educator in that moment. I was like, that stone is not worried about identity. It's not worried about all of these human constructs. That stone is so certainly a stone that when I drop this stereotype on top of it, it will shatter and fall apart. And I was like, be like the stone. Be so confident in your knowing and what you are and who you are that all of these external descriptions of what you are will just fall as they land on top of you, you know? And that's an extension of that, technology, that kinship of being open to the awareness and the possibility of being like, oh, this lifeless thing could never inform me, you know?
I have just a couple more questions before we go to audience Q&A. So they're big questions, but I'll try to ask them quickly. As a part of your welcome, you have an installation called Meat for the Beast that incorporates elements from the University of Michigan's collections and UMMA collection that focus on extraction and conquest. So why was it important for you to have that be part of this show?
There's two pieces that are exhibited in the Meat for the Beast presentation. And one is a large serpent. It's called This Is Not a Snake. It's actually an extension of a Lakota prophecy that had been applied several times around a black snake crossing the land, and that being a harbinger of the world as we know it changing or dying or falling apart. That prophecy was applied multiple times. It was applied with wagon trains. It was applied with railroad lines. It was, most recently, 2016, it was referenced quite a bit during the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I thought it was important. It was called the Black Snake Prophecy. And I was like, let's remind everybody that it is not a snake, that it is a serpent at best, but that it is monstrous, and that allows it to become something that is not in natural order with the world. We don't have to hate snakes, we have to be aware of what becomes monstrous. And so this iteration of it, I basically created a 60-foot long serpent made almost entirely out of material byproducts of extractive industry. It has, military cans, tires, oil drums, all of these different things, and they're mine. Like, the wheels are my wheels. The drums were equivalent to the amount of time that it took that I was using in fuel to produce this thing, get it to where it was going, and exhibit it. There's a recognition of my participation in feeding the monstrosity that we see, and it's a recognition and being accountable to that. In this iteration, I got to bring it to the museum, and I thought, oh, it would be really exciting to actually look through the collection at the museum as through that lens. Like, what is being preserved here that is a part of that extractive industry, and how through its preservation are we reinforcing, enabling, and encouraging its perpetuation, If a museum is a source for education and an opportunity for people to learn, what are we teaching them? And so I thought that, exhibiting these pieces in the serpent was the angle and direction in which to present it. But I also think, we could have just ran that snake all the way through the entire university, we could have put the head on one end of America and dropped it on the other, and be like, this is meat for the beast, but we were selective. We had limited space. And even the space itself, we chose that space because the space to exhibit this work is a vitrine. It is a part of the model of preservation. It is a glass bell, to sequester the work. And it also challenged what's inside and what's outside of the museum, We definitely designed it so that you could see it from outside, that you would not have to enter into the museum to see the work. And the two figures that are standing between you and the serpent are based on legends, Mandan legends. These are two twins. They are, our archetypical monster slayer twins. And there are stories that embed them with serpents and serpents that are out of control. But they are within the context of this kind of future world. They're presented as sculptures here, but I designed them as wearables. So I would wear and perform this work, and the helmet piece is, this whole sensory array is hindered by the regalia itself. So where we would perform with this work was on the land. My primary audience is usually the land, and I document that exchange for the demand for content, and the original design of it was let's apologize to the land from the human-shaped things. If it's not a specific human, it's all humans, And so we would wear these at extraction sites, mines. We've worn them at brown zones and also Superfund sites. where the land has been transformed by our demand from it. And before we do repair, I think it's really important that we apologize, you know, and that we say we're sorry. And because you can't see or hear or anything with them, you have to feel your way across the landscape with your feet and some other sense that's in your body. And the land then becomes the choreographer of its movement.
Cannupa, I want to thank you for the process, for the learning, for the mutual exchange, and that's not done yet.
Yeah,
and that's still evolving. And also appreciating all of the people here at the university and beyond who are part of this. I could keep asking you questions for a long time, but I want to make sure people here have time. So what I will say is in a moment, we're going to switch to audience Q&A. If you have questions, you'll come on down. If you must leave, please do so quietly, quickly, and respectfully. So we'll pause for a few moments as people come down for questions for Cannupa Hanska Luger, but let's give gratitude to Cannupa.
You're welcome.
And we'll pause for a moment as people exit and we shift to Q&A. Okay, folks, we're going to start with the Q&A. So if you happen to be exiting, could you please do so quietly? Because we're going to get started with the Q&A with Cannupa. Thank you so much. We'll start over here.
Hi. So your work is at a very colossal sort of scale. I was just wondering what sort of inspired that choice and why you continue to work at such a large and very dramatic and scene sort of perspective.
It doesn't seem that way to me. I could go bigger. Scale and volume and all of those sorts of things, I think, feed back to this idea of how space is taken up and the speed at which we are processing information presently. I'm a sculptor. 98% of my work is seen on a phone screen, two-dimensionally, you know? So I'm like, if you get to see it in real life, see it in real life, you know? And scale is a way to amplify importance. And it's also in direct response to the tiny world that we inhabit, which is 8 inches away from our face presently.
Are you going to try to make the giant serpent all the way across the country then?
No, the country has.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, I want it gone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go over here.
Hi, usually I have my notebook, so if I stumble on this, I'm sorry. But you spoke a lot about, a lot of this presentation was about UMMA's colonialist past, and it still has a colonialist presence, in a lot of ways, just with the stocks that it holds and arms and what's the other one? Fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, how would you identify this project in that decolonization that this university is at least claiming to attempt?
I think attempted decolonization is the right term, you know? It's often presented as a metaphor, but what does that look like practically? And how does practical application of decolonization, just a radical transformation of everything that we are inhabiting presently? I think it's important. There are a lot of people doing that sort of work and that sort of labor, but I'm kind of more interested in imagining something different. That's not my work. Decolonization is not my work. That's the colony's work, you know? And it will only make sense and be meaningful if the colony does it and separates itself from that mentality. So my gift is, can you imagine something different? And the Future Ancestral Technology projects are doing something that we had done from the moment of contact, which is a generous gift of an alternative to the system that we have. And so pay attention. It's temporary, the colony, and at some point, recognition and understanding that belonging to a place is actually different than colonizing a place. There's a profound gift in that, and Indigenous people from all over have been sharing that gift. So it's a matter of listening different, paying attention different, and it's work, and it's not my work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the whitewashing, you didn't really whitewash at all. Not the whole building. And I wondered if you could talk about reasons and symbols, or I'm sure it's not just a coincidence that you did it that way.
No, there were parts, I don't know if everybody heard, but there are parts that were not whitewashed on the surface of the building. And why? Was it symbols? What are all of these things? No, it was logistics. Logistics really made that happen the way it did. And that's working with the grounds and the facilities as partners in the project. There were areas that we weren't allowed to go. And we could have fought for it more, but I was wondering, like, is it necessary? Is it necessary to go that extra level and cover the whole piece, or is it enough to cover one plane, one perspective?
But you didn't even finish all 4 pillars.
I did. The image that you're seeing here is the clay drying.
Oh.
And so that the bottom of that pillar is still wet clay. And so when it dries, it gets profoundly different.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Hi, I love everything that you said about the richness of the culture and who really is rich and who really is not, about how much of a gift you can give to people. My question to you is, to me as an artist, working in community and working mostly with minorities, what is the challenge that I find in my work is reaching out to people in the Native American community here in Michigan. I come from a place of love in creating these installations that I make and creating these connections to their stories, their wants and their needs, but it has been incredibly difficult to make this connection with the community, Native American community. Is there a specific way or something that I should try that you will recommend me I do in order to be able to create these connections?
There's like many different ways to do it. And there's many different Native American communities, you know. I think a lot of it is like research and finding. The other is there is the Native American Student Alliance here on campus, who I'm seeing in the audience. Go tell her. Go tell her where. They're actually anchored and connected in it, but it's also like, what is the community? Are we talking about the 12 tribes? Are we talking about the Native American Student Association? What groups do we want? But I think the projects that you're doing, I think it is really important to talk about plurality. You know, when we talk about minority, we're actually talking about the vast majority, you know, and the making those connections and communicating, sharing each other's stories with one another, it builds those relationships where we are not compartmentalized as minority groups, but actually find solidarity in our experiences. It only makes a stronger connection. Recommendations, I came in under a project from Andrea Carlson in the University of Michigan, who already started to establish these connections. So I came on with like points to engage. So I'm not the source point to find them, But there are folks in the audience who may or may not want to talk to you. And that's also a possibility. Yeah. Smile, be generous, and don't do them wrong.
No.
Yeah. We're hard to find because we've been burned a lot. And we're like, I don't want to play.
Yeah, there is that feeling that people in your Native American community don't feel like they want to get burned again or
it's
betrayed or in some way or
Totally.
extracted
Totally.
something from there for other people's gains.
And it happens every time. And we do it ourselves. You know what I'm saying? It's like a learned process of extraction, of taking rather than giving. So when you make that exchange, see what it's like to put more in than you take out.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
So I really love the work that you did on top of the in front of the AMH building. But I have I don't have a lot of questions. Sorry, I just have one question.
I saw your hand.
So like my main one is that I just graduated from UMMA, and so I'm really and I work at the UMMA right now, and I want to go more into museum education and like community engagement and public learning and stuff like that. And so my question is like, because like as like a POC at the University of Michigan, like I've dealt a lot with, you know, the people here. And so it's like very like hard for me to like explain to like, I want people to enjoy the museum as a place of learning because it is like a cultural point. But like you said, I have a lot of problems with the way that the museum looks. Like I complain about it all the time. I hate it. I think it's a terrible layout. It's inaccessible.
Everybody.
It's terrible.
I know.
It's terrible. Anyway, sorry. So I was just wondering, like, what, like, and you said, like, you don't, like, it's not your fault. It's not your work to, like, decolonize it. And, like, the colony should want to, like, you know, the colony should want to separate itself. But, like, so my question is, like, how would you, like, I want to do more community organization, but I also want, like, to take back those things that, like, you talked about hoarding, the museum hoards, and, like, obviously we all know that, but, like, how do you, like, I want to get in there, you know, I want to get in the museum and take it.
You're in.
Yeah.
You're in. And we will not live in the beautiful place you can imagine. We will die trying.
Yes. And that's something I've been talking about a lot, especially in these past 2 weeks, about how like we have to understand that like we're going to die trying because it's not going to be something that like would like sorry, there's a lot of things that
it's not for us. We're in this place now, and we can recognize that. We'd be accountable to that. And your effort may not be recognizable, and it may feel like you are, you know, having this Sisyphusian, you know, boulder push up the mountain or sort of thing, but you didn't do what Sisyphus did. That's not your fault. You will move the mountain. And it's that slow and gradual effort. And the fact that you're here and not jaded enough to turn away from it gives me hope for my future generations. You know, the effort you're doing today is going to make something more beautiful for a generation of people that I will never meet and you will never meet. And so we'll keep doing that. You know, and but one step to that if you want like answer, you know, I have zero solutions, but one thing that I see that's really important is how and what the museum values and how do we shift our values so that we don't reinforce the museum satiating our demand. And I think the structure of a museum, it exists. It's a building. It inhabits space. A lot of that space can be transformed to do a whole lot of good. A whole lot of good. But we have it full of things from our past. So how do we recontextualize the purpose of a museum or a building or a university? How do we recontextualize it to satiate what we as populace demand? And we have to figure out what that is. And we're slowly figuring out what that is, but we're all contributing a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So please do not let it wear you down. It is changing. The building is falling apart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I just note we have less than 5 minutes. So
Okay.
here's what I would love to do to hear from everybody who's been waiting up here. Maybe we just hear briefly everyone's questions, and then Cannupa, you close us out with a reflection.
Yeah, I'll try. I'm really good at taking multiple questions and turning it into one answer.
So we're gonna try that. We're gonna try that with a dear.
I'm gonna stand up.
Dear 7 people. So if you can help us before the Rocky Horror Picture Show is playing next, we can do it. So let's start, and we'll go back and forth to hear everything with the final word from Cannupa.
Okay, I'll try to be fast. I'm also a ceramic artist, and I hear a lot of the things that you say about clay and like firing clay specifically. And I've really also thought about that a lot, and it's all very resonant and moving. And it does feel like a lot of responsibility. And then I also hear you talking about generosity, which is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. So I guess my question is, how do you reconcile like being a working artist who has to participate in capitalism in order to live while also trying to practice this generosity through your art practice?
You can do both.
Cool.
I recently graduated from Yale master's course, humble brag, but the important part of this is I took a tour with someone who really knew the architecture around there, and I learned that some of the architecture that has scorch marks, they were deliberately controlled set by the architect just so it would look like it survived a fire.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think is the source of our collective cultural obsession with pretending we're more ancient than we actually are?
Because we miss belonging to place, and so we reinforce these ideas of deep time to justify everything that we did to each other, to feel like you belong, and that's a part of it. Yeah.
I just had a question. Where do your ideas come from? Like, do you just have like a thought one day, or do you see something happening in current events and you're just like, oh, I could make like an art piece about this?
There is no scarcity. The world is abundant. Keep your eyes open. It comes in all the time from the ethers, you know. But reinforce abundance. There is not an idea problem. There is a resource problem. There is a fabrication problem. There are other things, but it's not ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
I know.
You don't have to answer this because it would be really cool to like hear the real reflection about like.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah, I know, but just to connect in this space that we're in right now, I'm very curious to know about like the vulnerability and emotion. I could feel it when you were speaking, but I really wanted to it's kind of my question with not just this process, but as an artist from, like when you began to call yourself an artist and like what that meant and what does like with everything you talked about, identity, fluidity, everything that you learned, how does vulnerability and emotion play into that and being an artist?
Yeah, vulnerability just happens. It's hard you have to do a lot of training to become callous and not be vulnerable. And we reinforce that in all of our systems. As a 6'3" male, vulnerability is like a fucking tool. Like when you see vulnerability in somebody of my gender and my size, it's actually not looked at as shameful, where it may be for you. So it's a fucking privilege to be able to express myself and be honest in that way, that I can't understand or comprehend an alternative or a forced alternative to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi. So when you were talking about your art piece that you let smash onto the museum floor, it got me thinking about like art and how we like try to make it seem valuable, and the only way we do that is through monetary value or putting them in these fake Greek buildings. And it's difficult for me because I do like museums sometimes, but it always feels like I'm walking through theft whenever I go into them.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing like what are new ways we can appreciate and give art value like outside of these structures?
I think the appreciation is a huge anchor for it, regardless of the structures that we have to navigate or the nefarious way in which they were received. The exchange that happens between you and the work, that's That's the valuable thing. The object is not the thing. It's the space between the audience and the presentation. That's the highest value that any of it can have, you know? And if we'd stop preserving it the way we do, then the value will go up dramatically because the supply is exhausted right now, you know? So it would be interesting to see what takes the place of that and what happens in between the two. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a memory for you that I won't take time, but about the addition. Because I've worked in that building for many years right next door, and everybody's been going pretty fast. So I'll just say there were trees there where the addition is now that I was very attached to. And so there
were trees.
Yeah. But I went to the community meetings that they had about the addition, and I can tell you that the architects did have a lot of great ideas about having you enter at grade rather than through an elevated set of steps, and about students circulating through the building.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that they've been fulfilled, but there is a history there that is quite interesting.
Yeah,
right?
I will tell you, working on this project, like every day, 15 people walked up this thing, stood at the door, and were like, oh, this is not an entrance.
So that is but to me, they completely got me. I was like, yes, the students will all be experiencing art every day. But then the Plensa piece that's there, the question that I have for you is, I'm so interested in the incorporation of the Roger sculptures, the Kara Walker vase, and also the relationship to the Plensa sculpture that's there. And I just wondered if you could say a little more about your vision of those pieces and how you're in dialogue with them.
It was collective. I mean, we had a bunch of objects that we could have, gone through, but the selection, color, form, idea, presentation, what it means, impact, all of those are what kind of distilled it down to the objects that were in there. So it was like, there was, of course, a thematic arc, going through it, but it's also recognizes the complexity of accountability to all of this and participation in all of it. And then to reduce it all the way down, they're mostly black and white, which is also mostly what the snake is, So there are all of these different forms, and those are, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And finally.
Ellipses.
Yeah.
Can you say more?
Oh, yes, that was done on the fly, the ellipse. It was done on the fly as I was painting it, and it felt like it was something out of context, right? So the ellipses always holds that spot. Plus, like, when I first started working and painting, I was doing graffiti, and the application of ellipses was just like such a hot shape and form, And then I was like, oh, also, I can roll that on with this little tiny roller, and it reinforces out of context, What happened before, what happened after, what will happen.
Yeah.
Can we thank Cannupa Hanska Luger and all of you? And we hope to see you over the next few days, including for the Memory and Monuments open house at UMMA from 12 to 4 on Saturday. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Yes, thank you.